In 1996, Pokemon put forward a vision of humanity's place in nature that's still remarkably progressive even today. In the world of Pokemon, humans aren't destroying whole ecosystems to build cities, or imprisoning billions of animals in factory farms, or culling billions of wild animals as pests, or emitting toxic chemicals that threaten to catastrophically alter the climate. All that happened in the past, but the problem has been solved. Humans have fixed their hearts and their tools, and figured out how to enjoy comfortable, industrialized lifestyles while earnestly loving every creature and making space for all of them as partners in self-improvement. As trainers, humans are uniquely empowered and in some ways dominant over Pokemon. There is a conceptual line drawn between humans and other animals, but there's no line drawn between human spaces and wilderness. Humans, even modern industrial humans, belong in forests, caves, and prairies, and animals belong in cities, farms, and roadsides. The series doesn't even draw a distinction between wild animals and domesticated species. They're all equally eligible for an enriching partnership with a human trainer. There are tons of conversations to be had about the environmental vision Pokemon presents. Is this future broadly realistic or wildly utopian? Does it capture the spirit we need to approach conservation, or is it deeply misguided? But personally, I'm less interested in the environmental ideas and values Pokemon does or doesn't preach than I am in the ecological stories that could be told in its world. Environmental fiction, especially environmental fantasy, is one of my favorite kinds of storytelling. Unfortunately, it's almost universally terrible because it embraces a very outdated view of what nature is and how humans fit into it. A view we'll call the wilderness myth. Maybe the best example of the wilderness myth is the 2009 movie Avatar. In Avatar, humans come to Pandora as aliens who disrupt the magical, harmonious web of life to satisfy their irrational greed. Nature is a pure, intricate whole that needs to be protected from humans who can only screw it up. The problems with this view are threefold. First, it's wildly inaccurate in a scientific sense. Nature is a constantly shifting mosaic of things trying to eat, starve, or otherwise replace each other. Humans are just one part of that mosaic. Second, it's counterproductive for conservation purposes. And third, it's impossible to tell interesting stories about it. Every story is the same story. Every story is Avatar. Pokemon rejects the wilderness myth entirely. The result is a world that, in my opinion, is the best playground for interesting ecological storytelling anyone has ever created. The problem is, the people responsible for Pokemon's brand integrity are terrified of the drama that would make those stories interesting. For 25 years, they've assiduously avoided giving more than the slightest hint that there could be complex, troubling, irresolvable conflicts between different groups of Pokemon, or between Pokemon and humans. Pokemon's world isn't utopian because Satoshi Tajiri wanted to show the world a goal to strive for. It's utopian because he wanted to present a world where players could simply pretend those conflicts didn't exist. That's disappointing to me personally, but it's their series and they can do what they want with it. What I find remarkable, though, is that in 25 years, no other game has explored that dramatic territory. In fact, Pokemon is still one of the only games ever made that directly addresses the relationship between modern human society and the rest of the natural world. Thousands of games take place in beautiful outdoor settings or have animals in them. Whole genres like survival or city builders are built around implicit positions relevant to this question. And a few games let you play as an animal or simulate whole ecosystems. There are even a couple of games about the ecology of early modern humans. But aside from Pokemon, there haven't been many games that present an industrial human society and a non-human natural world and explicitly characterize the relationship between them. At least, there wasn't until recently. For some reason, at least 4 games have come out since 2019 that take a clear position on humanity's place in the biosphere, which is just barely enough for a ranked list, so that's what we're going to make. To be clear, I'm not going to be reviewing these as games. If any of them seem interesting to you, they're all worth checking out. Instead, games will be scored poorly if they embrace the wilderness myth, and highly if they reject it, no matter how fun I thought they were to play. With that in mind, let's see how they did. Terra Nil, released for free on itch.io in 2019, is a game about ecosystem reconstruction. It comes last on this list because it is explicitly a game about recreating the mythical wilderness. Each of the game's maps presents you with a landscape made totally lifeless by human pollution and desertification. Your goal is to restore it to life by remediating the soil, digging wells, seeding plants, and finally, cleaning up after yourself to leave the environment pristine. The map starts fully degraded by humans and completely void of life, and ends in a stable, self-sustaining ecosystem without any evidence of human presence. Cleaning up after yourself is the hardest step. If you leave a single windmill or greenhouse standing, you've failed. To succeed as a restorationist, you have to deliver the fantasy that your work was never necessary in the first place. Terra Nil operates on a simple binary. The landscape is dead, which is bad, so the player has to bring it back to life, which is good. In real life, though, dead landscapes basically don't exist. Nature abhors a vacuum, and there are at least a few species that can thrive in even the most polluted soils. And most landscapes targeted for restoration aren't especially polluted at all. In reality, restoration is about something far more interesting: picking sides in the competition between potential ecological communities. It's not about creating a living landscape where there wasn't one before, but reshaping a landscape that is already very much alive. And why should we do that? What makes one set of species more valuable than another? That's a question that can only be answered by the values of a living human culture in an ongoing relationship with the landscape. In Terra Nil, though, there are no humans. That's literally what the title means. It's a reference to the legal concept of terra nullius, or nobody's land. When European colonizers first arrived in North America, they argued that because native people had never tamed the wilderness through agriculture and domestication, they had no legal claim to own the territory. That made the whole continent terra nullius, and therefore fair game for European settlers to claim as their property and violently remove any indigenous people who happened to be living on it. After that, they had free rein to log, plow, dam, mine, drain, and hunt it however they saw fit. In the process, they all but completely eliminated most of the ecological communities that existed before they arrived. Restoration is motivated by the urge to undo the catastrophic damage European settlers have inflicted on North American ecosystems. We want to pick sides because we feel like we've nearly destroyed something precious and we want to save it. That's a noble goal and one I feel very strongly about. But for a long time, environmentalists have unfortunately believed that saving those precious ecosystems meant turning them back into terra nullius. In North America, that meant not just removing roads and dams or remediating polluted soil or planting seeds and reintroducing animals, but also, and by far the most commonly, removing every species that wasn't there before Columbus. And by the strange, self-serving logic of terra nullius, that list included native humans. In some parts of the world, settlers forcibly removed indigenous people from their homelands in order to create national parks. Of course, most restoration projects don't involve evicting indigenous people from the landscape, but they usually don't need to. Just as in Terra Nil, the humans who used to call these places home were removed a long time ago. Restorationists just downplayed or ignored the obvious fact that restoring the pre-colonization ecosystem necessarily ought to include restoring its pre-colonization humans. The only way to avoid that conclusion is to invoke terra nullius. It was okay to exclude Native Americans because they simply didn't affect their ecosystem enough for it to matter whether they were there or not. This isn't something most white restorationists would necessarily say out loud, but it was something they implicitly took for granted in their work. The problem with that logic is that it's just wildly wrong. Native people were dominant ecosystem engineers who had a greater influence on their environment than any other single species. The supposedly pristine wilderness that existed before European settlement was a thoroughly human creation, systematically modified to meet human needs. Paradoxically, to restore their untouched wilderness, restorationists would need to restore the ongoing role indigenous communities played in creating and managing it. For better or worse, this is impossible even in landscapes where Native Americans have retained or recovered their original land rights. No humans in the US today of any cultural background are going to manage a landscape in exactly the way the shifting mosaic of Native American communities did in the 15th century. That doesn't mean restoration isn't worthwhile, it's more important than ever. But it does mean that the restoration community has had to find a new way to understand what they actually do and why it's worth doing. In my opinion, the best answer they've come up with is that restoration is a way to build a new, positive, expressive role for humans in the habitats we live in. Whether early restorationists knew it or not, it was always a living repudiation of the wilderness myth. Every successful restoration proves that modern, industrial humans can be constructive parts of our ecological communities. I think Terra Nil would simply have been a better game if it engaged with the complexities of restoration rather than ignoring them. But it's also a shame that one of the few works in this medium to tackle this subject at all does so by reinforcing the idea that modern humans can only have a positive relationship with nature by erasing ourselves from the picture. Alba, a wildlife adventure, is a game about birdwatching. You play as Alba, a young girl visiting her grandparents on Pinar del Mar, a Mediterranean island off the coast of Spain. Alba's grandma gives her a smartphone that lets her take photos and identify animal species and sends her out to explore the island. I'm not a birdwatcher myself, but taking aimless walks and taking pictures of whatever I happen to see has been my main way to connect with nature, and some of my most memorable walks were on vacations in places like Pinar del Mar. I played Alba during the middle of the night in January, and when I stepped out of Alba's grandparents' driveway for the first time, I could almost feel the sun on my skin. The colors and the soundscape really captured the feeling of a clear afternoon in a vibrant, subtropical habitat. In its gameplay, Alba is a spiritual successor to Pokemon, particularly Pokemon Snap. And like Pokemon, Alba never questions for a second that humans are legitimate members of our ecological community. Pinar del Mar is a completely human-dominated landscape, and its ruins suggest it's been occupied for a very long time. Each part of the island has its own list of birds and mammals to collect. No distinction is made between the city, beach, farms, and residential areas, and the nature reserve, ruins, and forest. Human artifacts and animals are both ubiquitous. Alba offers two main ways for humans to relate to nature. You can be a bird watcher, taking your phone and your guidebook around the island to check all the species off your life list. And you can help out around the island. It's the way those two come together that puts Alba in third place on this list. The phone app Alba uses to identify wildlife actually exists. In fact, the real app, iNaturalist, is far more powerful. It can identify birds and mammals, but also plants and insects and other invertebrates. The thing that has made iNaturalist such a compelling rabbit hole for me, though, is that even its vast image recognition abilities are still so limited compared to the huge array of weird stuff waiting to be discovered. In Alba, nature isn't just knowable, it's already fully known. Every species on the island is already in the guidebook. There are no surprises or mysteries. And not only is nature known, it's palatable and sanitized. Nothing is ever dirty. Every animal in Alba is a perfect specimen of its species. Predation happens once, implicitly, off-screen. There's certainly no sex, or parasitism, or starvation, or injury. There are no worms, or maggots, or bones. Pinar del Mar is an island, but there are no weird sea creatures. There isn't even any poop. It feels like the developers were trying to make nature kid-friendly, but in the process they took out everything that makes nature actually interesting to kids. The result is that wild animals in Alba exist as little more than the props of a stuffy hobby for boring adults. The other way for Alba to engage with nature on Pinar del Mar is to do chores. You can fill bird feeders, fix birdhouses, and free birds from six-pack rings. When Alba and her friend Inez decide to fix up the local nature reserve, they do so by rebuilding picnic tables, informational signs, and footbridges. Half of what she does has no relevance to wildlife at all. She picks up trash, she helps out in an archaeological dig, she even takes her neighbor's laundry off the line and puts it away. None of these things do anything to restore the composition or function of the island's ecosystems. The uniting theme is community service. The natural world is fine. Alba is just taking responsibility for the places where humans have gotten sloppy in keeping their part of the island in order. The main story has higher stakes, but it's presented in the same terms. Pesticide spills, livestock predation, and multi-million-dollar land use conflicts aren't complex, acrimonious disputes. They're minor deviations from social norms. Paving a wetland to build a luxury hotel is an expression of the same idle carelessness that leads people to litter or neglect to fill their bird feeder. It takes Alba only a week to render Pinar del Mar a perfectly ordered system. Every bird is noted in the guidebook, every piece of trash and laundry is put away, everyone is reminded of their responsibility to the broader ecological community, and none of them have any real reason to cause trouble. I'd like to give Alba credit for the fact that it presents a world where humans and nature are not mutually exclusive categories. But, like Pokemon, it only does so in the most technical sense. Alba subverts the wilderness myth by eliminating wildness from the world entirely. For me, that's a cure worse than the disease. To belong in Alba's nature, humans and other animals must be purged of mystery, conflict, and even untidiness. Alba's birdwatching app might superficially resemble iNaturalist, but the relationship it allows her to foster with the world is fundamentally different. She isn't contributing tiny snippets of knowledge to help one species better navigate its complex, contentious, and evolving relationship with the other inhabitants of its ecosystem. She's just walking around her house and checking to make sure all the paintings are still there. In the 2020 game Maneater, you play as a man-eating bull shark living in a Gulf Coast bayou. Maneater approaches nature with a very different tone than Terra Nil or Alba. There's not a hint of the sublime or pure here. Everything is touched. Nature isn't something precious that needs to be cherished, protected, or restored. It's the place where you need to watch out for giant sharks. For someone concerned about conservation, that irreverence can be kind of hard to swallow. Bull sharks are listed as near threatened by the IUCN, and fear-mongering about shark attacks has done serious harm to them and many other species.
Let it be said that those panic mongers who tell tales of the dangers of sharks are totally right.
But the fact that Maneater makes no effort at all to put forward a positive message about nature and conservation frees it to present a view of the world that breaks free of the wilderness myth entirely. Maneater's best feature is its level design and environmental art. Each area of the map exists in 2 tiers. Underwater, you're in a thriving bayou ecosystem, packed with a full food web of plants and animals. Knife your fin above the surface, and you discover that your habitat was right under the noses of yachts, beaches, boardwalks, and golf courses the whole time. And unlike Pokemon or Alba, Maneater isn't afraid of the conflicts that happen in a world where humans and wildlife coexist. Predation is so incessant that the gameplay rhythm reminded me of Pac-Man. You move through narrow passages, effortlessly gobbling up every small fish or turtle in your path, until you encounter an animal big enough to eat you, at which point you run away and come back once you've eaten enough that now you're able to eat it. And humans aren't exempt from the carnage. Shark hunters can hunt you in the water, and you can hunt humans on boats and on land, even in their own backyards. Where Maneater goes wrong, in my view, is that it paints our membership in this vibrant ecology in profoundly cynical terms. The game's framing device is a reality show meant to both evoke and mock Duck Dynasty-style hunting shows.
This is a basic cable show where people tune in to watch sharks kill people, and people kill sharks.
The narrator, voiced by Chris Parnell, delivers a constant stream of quips. The Cajun rednecks who participate in shark hunts get the worst of it.
When shark season ends, hunters return to their normal routine of bouncing checks at liquor stores. A shrill chorus of ankle bracelet alarms fills the air as shark hunters leave their homes to track our bull shark.
But it's an equal opportunity offender situation. Rich people are shallow and vain, poor people are deadbeat drunks,
while homeless and itinerant hobos will work for a living. They are not to be confused with bums who are sedentary and refuse to work.
Developers are greedy and irresponsible, and politicians are ineffectual and corrupt. One of the many excuses Maneater uses to disparage humanity is that humans have degraded the bayou.
Something about how the increasing commodification of the natural world has placed humans on a collision course with an environmental apocalypse.
But for Maneater, the fact that humans have caused erosion in the bayous, or dumped nuclear waste, or simply filled this beautiful ecosystem top to bottom with trash, doesn't imply righteous anger against industrial civilization. The game never implies that nature is pure and beautiful where humans are venal and tasteless. It tries to be judgmental of everything without leaving itself any ground to judge from. It sends the paradoxical message that life is inherently bad because it destroys life. The weird part about this, though, is that this perspective isn't reflected at all in Maneater's environments. Yes, the bayou is strewn with trash, fishing nets, human corpses, oil rigs, and even nuclear waste. But it's also just brimming with life. It simply doesn't feel like a landscape that needs to be saved or really even protected. In that sense, in the gaps between its overbearing side quests and obnoxious narration, Maneater is no less utopian than Pokemon. It leans into the aesthetic of interspecies competition, but that bloody violence still has no consequences. No matter how many turtles or alligators or whales or beachgoers or shark hunters you kill, there will always be more. And no matter how much humans hunt, fish, trash, pollute, erode, and develop the bayou, the ecosystem remains fully intact and apparently unaltered. Maneater talks big, but it's still terrified to sink its teeth into the real drama of ecological conflict. The result is a very mixed message. The narration condemns both sharks and humans as greedy, short-sighted, destructive creatures incapable of appreciating beauty or creating anything worthwhile. But the environments go to the opposite extreme. They're a glorious celebration of cities as a place where human cultures and diverse wild ecosystems can coexist sustainably, if not peacefully. In reality, urban development has done tremendous harm to wildlife. Urban habitats are new and difficult places to live, and only a few species of animals have figured out how to survive in them. But cities are still nature, and we can still find in them the stories and values and aesthetics we usually seek in landscapes that are altered in less obvious ways. That's especially true when, as in Maneater, we see cities from the perspective of individual wild animals who have mastered the art of making a living there. The core of repudiating the wilderness myth is realizing that for all our peculiar abilities, humans are simply one more animal evolving on Earth. The habitats we create are still expressions of the creative capacity of life in general. It's the juxtaposition of humans making homes for ourselves and evolution creating a new community of species adapted to share them that makes cities particularly fascinating places. And for all its flaws, Maneater is one of only a handful of works I know of in any genre that truly appreciates that. At first glance, Bugsnax might not seem like a game that belongs on this list. For one thing, it doesn't have any real animals in it, including humans. It doesn't use its fake animals to tell a story about the exploitation of natural resources or animal welfare or the preservation of wilderness. Where all of the other games I've mentioned directly invoke popular narratives about nature, Bugsnax just isn't really about that. What it is about, though, is the experience of being alive as an animal. It's the only game on this list that actually takes seriously the realization that humans are part of the evolving food web of life on Earth. In Bugsnax, you play as a reporter sent to write a story on an expedition to the newly discovered Bugsnax Island. The expedition is led by intrepid explorer Lizbert Megafig, but its crew is a motley bunch of grumpuses with no particular skills, each of whom came to the island for their own personal, intangible reasons. To bring the community back together, you have to catch the snack-themed creatures that inhabit the island and feed them to the grumpuses, turning their body parts into Bugsnax in the process. To catch a Bugsnax, you have to understand how it thinks. Where Pokemon seem to wander around their environment at random, Bugsnax perceive the world around them and react to it according to the preferences of their species. Frieders are attracted to ketchup and ranch. Spuddies charge at any intruders in their territory. Crapples pick up anything covered in chocolate and bring it to their nest. The player exploits all of these behaviors to capture the Bugsnax and feed them to the insatiable maw of the grumpuses. The grumpuses play the role of humans in the story, and they approach Bugsnax Island the way humans approach our world, through the lens of culture. And while all of our other games frame the relationship between humans and nature in collective, monolithic terms, Bugsnax embraces the plurality of cultural views of nature. Each of its 13 characters came to the island with a different perspective. Wambus wants to prove that he can succeed as a farmer. Lizbert wants to be an intrepid explorer. Others seek artistic inspiration, emotional connection with wildlife, a quick buck, spiritual enrichment, strength, adventure, or scientific knowledge. At first, it seems like Bugsnax minds and Grumpus minds are very different things. Bugsnax are simplistic creatures. They run around in circles, they're easy to please and easy to deceive, which leaves them entirely at the mercy of the endless appetites of the far more clever Grumpuses. Grumpuses, on the other hand, have nebulous desires that resist easy satisfaction. Their pursuits fail in more or less overt ways, for a variety of reasons, but in every case, the problem is that they have projected abstract ideals onto a world that simply can't deliver them. This next part involves some pretty major spoilers for the end of the game, so if you haven't played it yet and want to avoid them, skip to the time on the screen. The way the game ends completely pulls the rug out from under this sense of superiority. Bugsnax look like snacks for a reason. They're easy to catch for a reason. They were the bait, Bugsnax Island was the trap, and the Grumpuses were the dupes who fell for it. Any Grumpuses who eat too many Bugsnax are assimilated into the parasitic superorganism that is the island. Bugsnax Island is like the tail of a spider-tailed horned viper. It created a whole fake ecosystem to lure its prey into a false sense of dominance and indulgence. It gave them a wilderness to conquer, to exploit, to escape into, to become one with. For Bugsnax Island, cultural concepts of nature are preferences as directly exploitable as Frieder's love of ketchup. What's remarkable to me about this conclusion is that it doesn't feel like a prank. The developers aren't making fun of the Grumpuses for being naive and easily tricked. It's not about who comes out on top. It's about what it means to be alive. Evolution gives us the minds we use to navigate the world. Whether those are cultural, learned, or pure reflex, we can only experience life through that limited window. Our behavior is shaped and driven by the contours of that window, and that leaves us vulnerable. Other creatures can use the peculiarities of our minds to manipulate and exploit us, and we can do the same to them. But, and this is the crucial part, we also can't help but enjoy ourselves while we do it. The pleasure and meaning we find in pursuing the goals evolution has set for us are as real as anything can be. And what could be a better visual metaphor for the joyfully interpenetrating vulnerability of life than a Grumpus opening its mouth to devour a Bugsnax and then having its nose turn into that Bugsnax? To me, that sense that we're all in this strange, joyful, painful existence together is the premise that makes activities like restoration, birdwatching, or even hunting meaningful in the first place. And I find it remarkable that Bugsnax is able to evoke that perspective where none of these far more realistic and explicitly ecological games can. Ecologist Daniel Botkin has been one of the most influential voices arguing against the wilderness myth. In his 2012 book, The Moon in the Nautilus Shell, he speculated that by the second decade of the 21st century, the elaborate and very popular Xbox, Wii, and other computer-based games, which are highly dynamic and involve chance and risk, will be changing the way the younger generation views everything, including the environment. If I had read that before this year, I think it would have struck me as overly optimistic. Video games obviously have the potential to achieve this, but developers hadn't shown much interest. Looking at these 4 games though, I can't help but hope that they mark the beginning of a trend. Terra Nil is a perfect proof of Botkin's suggestion that games can simulate natural systems in a way that no other medium can. There's a ton of potential in puzzly strategy games about trying to manage the complex dynamics of an ecosystem to achieve a particular goal. But in order to reach that potential, we need to abandon the idea that nature develops in one predictable direction, and we have to accept that humans are doing that management from inside the system. Alba is a lovely, chill game about a community's relationship with its local wildlife. I just hope the next game in this vein isn't so uncomfortable with nature's mysteries, anomalies, and rough edges, or with serious conflicts between the interests of humans and wildlife. Maneater is the most frustrating but tantalizing hint of what might come. There are a couple good nature shows about urban wildlife, but only in a game can you just vibe in a creature's body in a virtual space. It's such a treat. It's just undermined by the game's fundamental belief that both humans and predators are inherently and exclusively forces of destruction. A similar game that had an ounce of curiosity and empathy, and some genuine interest in the history of its setting, could be a real masterpiece. I'm very impressed by the way Bugsnax manages to position humans as subjects of evolution, not dominant or exceptional. To be honest though, that achievement is pretty abstract and it only really hits at the end. Looking forward, I think Bugsnax is most remarkable because it takes the Pokemon formula one step toward a dynamic ecosystem made of independent, interacting agents. It just ultimately isn't a very big step. There's a lot of room left for future games to expand on this premise. The wilderness myth was never true in the past, and it's increasingly obvious that it can't apply to the future. We need to develop new ways of understanding our place in the world. Each of these games suggests a different way for the medium of games to help us do that. I can't wait to see what developers will come up with as they explore the messy guts of our long history on the planet.